I would like for you to take us through your thought process of a startup, like how you and your business partner decided to open it up and where you at today.
Yeah. So I actually wasn't interested in a startup initially. Initially I was thinking about going the acquisition route until I was an associate with my partner at the same office. She was actually the one that was thinking about doing the startup, and it kind of opened my eyes to some of the benefits of going that route. Not having to inherit someone else's mess or change things to fit your vision. You can kind of create it from scratch and build something. So she kind of opened my eyes to some of the advantages of that. And the way, we were kind of going down separate tracks, but then we talked, and it made sense for both of us in terms of where we're at in life. I have two kids. She has a kid now, for us to have a good work-life balance, for us to partner up. So that's what we decided to do, and that was maybe 14 months ago. So about March, April of last year is when we had those initial discussions, and then we did the demographic report, kind of went through everything, found a location, and started the process from there.
That's awesome. How was the first conversation? Like, I'm I'm always interested in these, like even little words, right? So
Yeah.
you guys associates, she pulls you aside and says, "Let's go for lunch."
Yeah, no, it was a little bit more casual. It was more organic than that. It wasn't very structured conversation. It was just we worked together for about a year and a half, and we saw how each other works. We saw each other's temperament, personalities, and we realized, that it was going to be a good fit in the sense of we don't have conflicting personalities. Where she's a little bit stronger, I may be a little bit weaker, and vice versa, personality wise, clinical skill set wise. So it's very complementary versus um, being duplicative. We weren't two aggressive personalities kind of that would conflict with each other. Um, so it just came up organically like that. And then, over time, I just told her, I just have this vision that we could do this. And I know she has certain preferences in terms of how she wants an office to run. And for me, being a son of immigrants, and especially an Indian, we're always kind of growing up, we're told, it's if we can run our own business and be independent, that's the way to go. So that was always in my mind, doing it some way. So that's kind of how it came about. It was a little bit more organic, but we talked it out, and then eventually we did have that one conversation where it's like, okay, we got to dial it in. But I think the process over the year was just kind of seeing how each other works and going from there.
That's amazing. Did you ask your dad for advice before you guys opened?
My dad actually was going through some health issues, so he passed away prior
Oh
to
my
the
God, I'm
office
sorry.
opening. But my mom was a good resource, and then obviously I have some other family in town as well. A lot of my family's here in Atlanta, so
That's
I
amazing.
was able to rely on them for advice. And I have other people in other industries that have started businesses, so
Right.
it was good, kind of seeing what I was getting into and not going into it completely blind.
Yeah. But I'm sure he gave you the blessings, right?
Oh, of
Before.
course, yes, yeah. And
Yeah.
he always, even prior to his passing, he always motivated me to not just work for someone else for the rest of my life, to kind of take control of my own destiny. And even my own experiences as an associate kind of led me down that path as well, where just being out of control of your hours, your schedule, how the office is run. It over time, as you gain experience, it just slowly rubs you the wrong way. So you kind of want to do things how you envision it.
Right. Can you walk us through the, like, how do I phrase it? If we look at the conversation today in our space in dentistry, especially when it comes to startups and private practice ownership, the conversation is you graduate from dental school, you have almost $500,000 loan, you're gonna go and work for the DSO, and there's no way you're gonna open an office. How is your story fitting within that narrative?
So I actually, we were kind of fed that too. I graduated in 2017, and we did have DSOs come speak at the school, and that's kind of what you think, right? That opening an office is hard, that it's financially not possible, that you're going to go into even more debt in addition to the student debt that you already have. But I was fortunate enough that I never worked for one of the larger DSOs. I started at a private practice down in Macon, Georgia, worked there for about a year. And then I found my group practice here in the Atlanta suburbs where I'd been working for the past, 4 or 5 years until I decided to do the startup. Um, but it was, did have some DSO aspects towards the end, but I would I would tell people that that's not the only route that you can go, and actually the quickest way to financial independence, it's not easy, but is to look into starting your own practice because if you have the clinical skill set there, which is the foundation always, you're going to be able to build on top of that and you got to bet on yourself at a certain point. And I was always told growing up, nothing worth having in life is easy. So in my mind, the easy way out was just to be an associate at a DSO. You can coast doing that for the next 25 years, 30 years, and you could retire comfortably, live a comfortable life, support your family, all of that. But it may not be truly fulfilling for you if you want something more beyond that in terms of creating a vision, making an impact in the community, things like that. That's never going to be available to you to the same degree as it would be as a business owner.
Right. And I think that that narrative also misses an important aspect that, like, the making of becoming a dentist.
Mhm.
You're like type A, right? So, like, you got to be there. Like, you're driven.
Yeah,
Like, you
yeah.
love to make your own decisions. And part of that narrative, what it doesn't fit in my head a lot of times, is like, yeah, so you were that kind of person, and now you're at the point like you're gonna forget that. Like, it's in your DNA.
Yeah,
You want
yeah,
to control things. You want to control your own destiny.
absolutely. And, after a certain point, you reach a certain point in your career where you, for me, it was just seeing how the staff was treated, some of the pay structures, financial things like that, and then just how the practice was run. You're in your mind, you're like, I would do this differently, but you don't have the avenue to change things because you are an associate. So, um, I think that's kind of what spurred me was, if I were to do this, there's a certain way that I would like to do things, certain way that I would like to treat people, do procedures. I mean, from A to Z, there's just having that full control was definitely an appealing aspect for me.
Okay. So I'm taking notes, and I think the important part for people that are listening, especially those that are considering to open an office, is after graduating the dental school, you work for 4 to 6 years, right?
Yeah, and uh, you know, I probably would have done it a little sooner, but I did have, my dad was going through this health issue, so it just wasn't the right time for me in my personal life to move forward with that. But I would definitely, unless you're just exceptionally talented clinically and you don't have a lot of family commitments that are splitting your time, I would definitely recommend working for at least a year or two, getting that clinical foundation in place, making sure your clinical skill set is there, your treatment planning skill set is there, patient communication skill set is there, learning what works, what doesn't work. It's always better to do that under someone else's roof than than learning those mistakes or making those mistakes while trying to open a business or run a startup. That would just seem very daunting to me, looking back at it. Because we come out of school, I mean, we know enough to be dangerous, but we don't. I'm nowhere near the clinician or the communicator that I am at this point in my career that I was back in 2017 when I graduated. So I would definitely
Totally.
recommend a year or two of training, or associateship or something, a place where you can stay busy, see patients, get reps um, before venturing out on your own.
Okay. What are the other narratives that now you look back, you're like, that is a total BS?
Um, I think definitely the you have to be an associate for life was a big one. Um, and the fact that they tell you that a startup can't succeed, I think that's always initially, people push you towards the acquisition route, and that's what I was leaning towards initially as well. But I think a startup is a viable option for a person in the right situation. You have to make sure financially you're in a place where you can afford to take a little bit of a, you're not going to have as much income coming in initially as you would with an acquisition, but it's not impossible. If you have some savings from being an associate and you've been smart with with your money, you can have that buffer built in to be able to do that. So, and I also think that, the myth that what am I trying to say? The myth that you can't, yeah, that you can't start up your own practice, I think it's just false. I think they try to feed you that you have to just be an employee, but I don't think that's true.
Yeah. And do you think they is the DSOs or the practice transition people, or
I
like,
would say, there's a big DSO influence nowadays, right? I'm not as versed in it. I don't claim to know everything, but that just seems to be the influence nowadays, is that they're, these new grads are being saddled with a lot of debt, and they feel like the only way out is to join these big groups. And there are certain advantages to going the DSO route. They'll provide you some CE, but I would just treat it as a stepping stone, not as the final destination. Um,
right,
I think it does provide value early on in your career to kind of, it's mutually beneficial, right? They get somebody that is going to come in and do work for them, and you could use them to build your skill set, get some CE that you've always wanted to do, and it can be a mutually beneficial relationship in that way. But I wouldn't recommend it as a final destination to anybody, um, unless they don't have the drive to do something on their own. There's nothing wrong with being an associate for the rest of your life, but you have to understand that it comes with the drawbacks of not having the flexibility and not having the control of the vision for how you want to practice in your career.
right. Another story that I hear a lot is, okay, so you want to open up your own practice, but you have to join DSO. Ideally, the ones that's like a mill that you see 25, 30 patients a day. You have to get efficient so that you can get your hands. I don't know, I forgot the saying, but like,
Get your
that
hands
you're
wet.
so,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, like you're so comfortable, like, putting fillings and crowns and all that stuff. Do you believe in that?
Not, I don't think you need to see like an absurd amount of patients a day, but I do think you need to stay busy. The only way you get better is by doing the procedures. My first crown looks nowhere near like the crown that I did yesterday. The crown that I did yesterday looks significantly better than the first patient I did a crown on. Same goes for a filling, same goes for an extraction. You just get better the more that you do it. But at the same token, I wouldn't do it to where you're sacrificing patient care. You want to slowly build up to that. At the end of the day, the goal shouldn't be to be fast. It should be to get good first. And once you get good, you can work on efficiency in your processes, how you work with your assistant. And that's where the speed will come from. The speed shouldn't come from sacrificing quality. It should come from just learning the procedure, doing it the same way every time. That's kind of how I did it. Um, and then just refining those processes over time.
You said something so cool just now. I don't know if you realized.
What was that?
You said speed comes from working with your dental assistant.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's it. I always tell, even my assistant now, she knows, I communicate to patients, it's a team effort. It's me doing a lot of the technical work, sure, but if I'm working with an isolite the whole time, it's going to take me forever to do anything. So having a well-trained assistant, them knowing how you like to work, and communicating after a patient, doing some debriefs, kind of figuring out what worked, what didn't. Maybe they have some preferences in terms of how they like things done. And not just because you're the doctor, you don't take their advice to heart. It's kind of putting that ego aside and working together as a team for the benefit of the patient. That's kind of how I like
Right.
to approach it.
That is so cool. So you actually, after a procedure, would sit down and go over and say, maybe we should have done this a little different, like this instrument and how you pass, and maybe we
Yeah,
create
I
signs
feel
where
like
you
if
know what I need.
Yeah, there's some times where you feel like, all right, we nailed that. Patient had a good experience. It was really efficient. Everything went well. And there's other times where it's a little clumsy, right? You get the feel that things are taking a little bit longer. Maybe it's something that I'm doing. Maybe it's something that the assistant is doing. So the only way to kind of address that and get better is to actually debrief and kind of talk about it. You could, if you're not communicating with your assistant, they don't know any better. They're just gonna do the same thing every time. And if they don't communicate with you, you've got your way of doing things. So it's kind of figuring out that synergy. um, to make sure that you're working as efficiently as possible and benefiting the patient as much as possible.
That is so cool. I haven't heard that before. So I know consultants talk a lot about this, coaches talk a lot about this, but coming from a doctor, I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like my partner and I, we both talk about how, yeah, we're the doctor, and ultimately, there's a level of respect that comes with that, but we're not beyond reproach in terms of, you can, we both want to be approachable in terms of things that we can improve on, and it doesn't matter where the advice comes from. I think I was reading an article, it was like about the Toyota factories, and they talk about how even the lowest man in the factory can go to corporate and provide feedback, and they'll act on that feedback. And that really stuck with me because it's like good advice isn't just limited to the C-suite, right? Good advice can come from anywhere. So I, that's always kind of stuck with me, and I never want to. I may not act on it. I may listen to it and think, okay, that's how they feel, but I may not follow through, but I definitely want to give them the opportunity to be heard because I think they feel empowered that way as well.
That's super cool. Who were some of the people in the industry that directly or indirectly influenced you during that stage of getting ready for the startup?
Influence in the sense of like just kind of helping us out through the process is,
Helping out, or maybe listening to podcasts, or
yeah.
anybody like get your mindset in the right place.
I definitely listen to the Dentalpreneur podcast. That was one. That's been a good resource. Shared Practices was another. Those were two, and the Dentist Money Show. Those are probably the three that I listen to. And then obviously Zen One podcast after I,
Right.
met you, and I've,
Thanks for
I've
the
started
plug.
listening to that as well. Yeah, of course, of course. Those were probably the big podcasts that I listened to. And then in terms of reading books, just some of the business books that people tell you to read. Good to Great was one that I read. Traction was another one that I read. Uh, and then you just kind of, I think the other, you meet people along the way. When you first start a startup, you're kind of working with the bank initially. The bank makes some contacts to you in terms of who could help you with your commercial real estate, finding a space. And then from there, you meet your equipment rep. They know contacts in terms of people that you could talk to. So building a network that way locally was beneficial as well.
That's amazing. Have you ever heard about the book called Unreasonable Hospitality?
I have heard of it. I haven't read it.
Okay. Can you text me your address? I'll send it to you.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I'll text it to you.
That's one of the books that blew my mind.
Yeah. I think I also worked at Publix when I was younger, so that the customer service training from Publix has kind of stuck with me as well. Um, it's really ultimately, dentistry is healthcare, but it's a people relations business at the end of the day. You know, Patients, you're always going to try to do your best work possible, but patients don't know what a good class 2 looks like. They don't know that you had a perfect 10 degrees on your prep and that the margins were really clear and super fine. They just know how you treated them, how they felt when they walked in the door, and the experience that they had. So that's always been my focus, is to make sure that how would I want to be treated when I'm walking into a healthcare office? And I'll even take notes of when I have my own doctor's visits, like, all right, they were just in and out. It wasn't really personal. They didn't really talk to me. It's like, how did that make me feel? Didn't make me feel great, right? So it's like, I'm not going to do that to my patients. Even if I'm running a little bit behind, I still try to make them feel like they're not a number. It's not easy some days, some days you're running behind, but you never want to, I don't know, it, you never want to rush a patient out the door. I feel like bedside manner goes a long way to building that trust, and trust is crucial to treatment acceptance. It all kind of flows down from there.
That's pretty cool. So maybe now we can move a little bit towards you guys opened,
Yes.
right? And maybe a week or two. You and Dr. Watts, right?
Yes, Dr.
The
Watts.
business part. Yeah.
Yeah, at
So
Esteemed
you,
Dental Studio. Yep.
yeah. So you and Dr. Watts are sitting 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and you're like, man, like, I didn't think it's going to be this way. Was there anything like that? Any thoughts like that?
Yeah, it's actually been a unique situation. She recently had her daughter, so she's been on maternity leave. She's been at the office kind of helping out, but I've been the one seeing patients clinically. And I would say, the one thing of in the first month, it's been about a month now, that really struck me is how many hats you have to wear as a business owner. You're always told that, but there's so many things like fixing a chair. You have to be the IT guy. You have to be the technical guy sometimes. You have to, then you're also, right now, I'm the hygienist. So it's like learning about Cavitron tips that I never, it's just like things like that you never really put much thought into as an associate because you didn't have to, or since dental school, you didn't really have to think about that. So I would just say just a number of hats that you have to wear, and being a jack of all trades was definitely eye opening. And then just the amount of work that goes into opening an office, from the infrastructure required. It's crazy the amount of stuff that has to be put in and working correctly for the office to function optimally were the two big
Right.
eye openers to me.
That's amazing. What are your thoughts on doing your own hygiene?
Long term, probably I would not want to do that. But initially, it's been good. I think patients aren't used to that. It's something different for a lot of patients. They come in, they see the dentist kind of fiddle around in their mouth for 5 minutes, and then he walks out. But in our office, it's been different, right? I spend the whole appointment with them. I go over the X-rays. I do the cleaning. So I think in that sense, it's been a patient builder, because I'm the one physically spending more time with them. So in that sense, I do like that, and especially in these early days, where you really want to get to know your patients. You want to make sure each patient has that A+ experience. So in that sense, doing my own hygiene has definitely been beneficial.
One of my favorite offices, like prior to Zen, I had a company. We were building dental practices. And so in 2011, we built a practice in Park Ridge, Illinois. It's one of the suburbs called Uptown Dentistry. I mean, till this day, these are my favorite people. They still do their own hygiene.
Really?
And when I talk to Dr. Jeff, he's like, it's the best thing we've done. We have so much trust with our patients. Like treatment planning, no problem. You mean trusting from patient to do a certain procedure? No problem. Right.
Right.
So obviously there are downsides. I'm not saying like that's the model to go. Obviously
Right.
hygienists are amazing, but when it's done right, it's like a secret weapon. So
For
to
sure.
the point where sometimes I'm in the industry, right? I'm sitting and thinking, man, should I bring my whole family to Chicago twice a year and go see them and be the patient at that practice? Like it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that kind of attention. It's amazing. So I don't know.
And it's
I
very
just want,
different from, I mean, every practice I've worked at and how the majority of practices I would assume. I mean, they're mostly hygiene driven initially for new
of
patients,
course.
and then the doctor comes in afterwards. So it's a good change of pace. And when patients aren't expecting it, it's a pleasant surprise for them. That's definitely what I've seen.
Yeah. How do you, so let's talk about the team. How
Sure.
many people do you have and how did you go about finding the people? And then I don't know if you want to talk about it or not. Did everybody work out to your expectations? And then did you already have to part ways with anybody?
No, we haven't had to part ways with anybody, and I'm very fortunate. I'm in a situation where we have two staff members. We have an office manager, so it's one person up front, and then I have one assistant kind of helping me out with hygiene and treatment. And both of them were at the office we worked at, Dr. Watts and I worked at previously. So we're fortunate in that sense that I'd already worked with both of them. So I had a good relationship with both of them. And, through other circumstances, it's a long story, but through other circumstances, they were able to join us at our practice. So there's a level of familiarity there. I know that's not going to be the case for every person that does a startup. It's a very unique situation, and I don't take that for granted. But it's been good for us, and it's definitely given us a boost because there's no hiccups in terms of learning each other or getting processes down. Um, I mean, she already knows how to file claims. She knows how to follow up with patients. She knows how to communicate to patients when she comes in the room. So, in that sense, it's been a real secret weapon for us. Our office manager, and then our assistant. She's worked with me for about 8 months at the other office that I was at as an associate. So we kind of know. I know her strong suits. I know where she can improve, and we've worked together. She kind of knows how I like to do things. So there's never been kind of that orientation period or kind of training period. It's been kind of just going from one location to just doing it at our own practice now.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so very
Um,
fortunate. It's a very unique situation. I
oh
wouldn't
yeah.
have,
Yeah.
it's not going to be able to
But
be replicated.
you know what? From my experience, I never sometimes people say, well, you get lucky. And I say, so what?
Yeah.
Life is
That's,
long,
yeah.
right? So we're all going to get a pile of shit, pardon my language, one way or the other,
Oh, yeah.
right? So, like, if you can get one lucky bounce, great, let's go, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all going to get lucky bounces. And so
Hmm.
I don't like when people say, well, you know, like if you look at some dentists, oh, his parents paid or her parents paid for the dental school. So what?
You still have to put in the work beyond that. That still,
Exactly.
it gives you the opportunity. It gives you a little bit of a head start, but ultimately it doesn't do the job for you, So
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely agree.
Yeah. Same thing. Like for me, I'm an immigrant and people say, well, you got lucky. I'm like, yeah, I got lucky that I was born in a different country. I have so much perspective on what's
Hmm.
going on here, what's going on in other parts of the world, right? Yes, it is being lucky. Like I can't change that. Like
Right.
I didn't choose that. It just happened to me. Right. So I'm just gonna carry on and enjoy that was part of my life. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
But you still put in the work to build your old business and now to build Zen. That didn't just come from you moving here.
No.
You got lucky, you had the opportunity, but you also built on top of that and took advantage of that. So
Right. It's
yeah,
what you
no, I
do with it.
definitely agree. Yeah.
100%. When you and Dr. Watts sat down, like this is the practice, was there anything that both of you discussed and said, like, I'm flexible here, but this is what I'm gonna like, have a line on the sand and say, like, no.
Yeah, I think we were both flexible in terms of, just speaking clinically, in terms of some of like kind of the materials that we use, things like that. We're a little bit flexible there. The non-negotiables for us was the space, how much room we needed. We both like to work out of 2 or 3 rooms. Dr. Watts she's done a residency at the Foundry, so she has great surgical experience. So we knew we wanted a surgical suite as well to be able to accommodate that and for her to do some of the larger cases that she's looking to do. Um, so we knew at least 10 ops was was where we wanted to start. That was a non-negotiable for us. And then I think another non-negotiable was just, or in terms of something that we felt passionately about was how we wanted to treat the staff. We both had a very similar mindset to that in terms of not nickel and diming and trying to, get the lowest pay, but having it be just a vision that we had for the office, having it be a team. And if the doctors are doing well, we want to make sure that the staff is doing well, that the whole office feels like one unit and not just them serving the doctor's interests. Those are two
Do you
of
have
the
any
things that
examples of things that
I
you've
think,
done right away?
you know, um, in terms of we've got an incentive systems in place, bonus systems in place that are more team office oriented. They're not just by department or things like that. And we've also started them off at very competitive pay as well. So I think um, in terms of that, that's where we've started. We're still early. We're still exploring how to do that. But I think as we grow, that's definitely the mindset that we want to have. Is that if we're successful, we want the office to share in that success as well.
That's awesome. That is really cool. Um, I asked about this. So, how do you look at the future? Have you had any discussions on the goals for the first year, production goals, or 5 years, or anything like that? How do you guys look for the next 5 years,
Yeah,
or at
we're
the next
still
5 years?
yeah. We're still dialing in specific numbers. Right now, we're just trying to see what works and what doesn't work. But in my mind, the goals for the next 5 years would be to have all the ops equipped and have both of us in there. And ideally, we're doing enough in production and collections to support both of us being there full time. Definitely within 5 years, that's for sure the goal.
Of course.
Beyond that, towards we have a 10-year lease at this space. I think beyond that, we've discussed having our own building and maybe building a larger practice. I don't think we would go the multi-location route. We both came from a group practice that had multiple locations, and we've seen some of the downsides of that, where it's difficult to manage culture, and each office kind of becomes its own silo. So that didn't appeal to either of us. I think one office is also a little bit easier to manage culturally, the culture there, the staff there. And it also provides everything we would want financially, I think, from one large office that you could get from multiple locations. So in terms of the long-term vision, that's where I
It's
see ourselves
amazing.
going. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I work with so many offices that had visions, especially when I was building dental practices. I still remember a few guys that I want to have 400 locations. I want to have 300 locations. Few of them materialized. Very few built over 50 location groups, 20 location groups. It's really hard. But the ones that had a vision of building one, but call it mega location, whatever you want to call it, they're always happy.
Yeah.
Like
There's a
they're
certain,
it's
sorry,
just
not
a
to interrupt.
different
Yeah.
vibe to them. No, you're right. So like it's just a different vibe because it's one office, it's one building. If something happens, you're there. You're building the team, you're getting bigger, you have bigger budgets for marketing, you have bigger budgets to even for team members, you have so many other things. People excited to join bigger things, right? So like it's easier to contain, it's easier to set the goals. I love that.
Yeah. And I feel like you're more, it, it's quality over quantity for me. It's just one really good location that's a key part of the community, that patients know and patients trust, and you're not having to worry about degradation of quality of care or culture at another location that may be 10, 15 miles away. It's not impossible to have two locations that are great, and there's people that are doing it all the
Right.
time and doing it successfully, and that's a great model too. But I just know for the vision that I had and the the time that I'm willing to commit, and to that, I just don't have that to commit, to do it successfully. And if I can't do something, if I don't feel like I have the time to commit to do something successfully, then I'm going to commit to something that I feel like I can do successfully, which is one large location.
That's amazing. I love that. um, when people reach out to you and say, all right, you opened the office, I'm going to open an office too, what do you say, like, focus on these two things or focus on these three things? What would that be?
Yeah, great question. I would say definitely know what you're getting into prior to anything. Know everything that goes into starting up an office. Make sure you have your finances in order. Number one, understand that you are going to take a bit of a hit from when you were an associate to when you're starting up a practice. That cash flow does not come immediately. Um, so that's one thing I would definitely tell them to keep in mind. Another thing I would tell them would be to network, whether it's through the bank that they're working with or local associations, local societies. Definitely get to know people in the community because you're starting your own business, and you can do all the SEO and marketing that you want, but if you have a big presence locally and people know your name locally, that goes a long way. So I would definitely say get good at networking, get good at communicating, be comfortable with being told no, um, is definitely advice number two. And three, kind of ties back into just knowing what you're getting into. It's going to be a lot of work. You have to be fully committed. It's not something, I mean, thankfully I have a partner and we've been able to split the duties, but if you're doing it yourself, it's a lot. And it's something that you have to be fully committed to, and you have to have everyone on board. Your family should be on board.
Your
You have to have
spouse?
buy-in from everybody. Exactly, because I'm not able to do what I'm doing for my practice without my wife helping out at home, and she's as key to this whole thing as anybody else. And Dr. Watts would say the same for her spouse and her family. It's a team effort to make something like this happen. So I would say those are the three things that I would definitely be aware of and keep in mind.
Can I throw one more?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Attitude.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah. I think you have to be very, I mean, I'm very naturally, I try not to get too up or too down. Um, you have to be very even keel. You have to understand that in this process, you're going to run into some things. We're still dealing with some issues right now. And you will get frustrated, but you can't let it get your attitude down or get your mindset down. You've got to always, at the end of the day, have a vision in mind. And I guess that would be another piece of advice. Just begin with the end in mind. Kind of know how you want to practice, what type of patients you want to see, what is your ultimate goal at the end of the day? Where do you see your life in 10 years? And then reverse engineer that for your practice to allow you to do that. And then continue building towards that every day. there's going to be days where you kind of forget that end vision and you need that remotivation, but always have that in mind. You don't necessarily have to write it down. For some people that helps, but just understanding that you're doing all this for a reason and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not just torture for the sake of torture or dealing
Yeah.
with, all this stuff for no reason, that you got into it for a reason, and to stay motivated to continue with that.
Yeah. I think you can probably see this in your parents, and I certainly have that, is like when you have this attitude of an immigrant, it's like you can't even let stuff buck you down because you're like, what? I
Yeah,
know
right.
where I come from, right? So like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
so everything is a blessing. All right, the problem, cool, we'll deal with it. Like this, okay, we'll deal with it. We can
Yeah.
always like fall back into something else. But like this attitude is such a cool thing. And I think the other part, like I think I've done a whole podcast on like your relationship with the spouse, right? So like, we don't talk about it at all. But I've seen many, many times when that one relationship will even make it or break it,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, you talk about the financial hit, right? How are you going to communicate this with your spouse? Like I've seen people downsize because they wanted to open a practice, change cars
Mm-hmm.
because they wanted to open the practice. If you're going to get a loan, it doesn't mean you're going to leave off of that loan, right? So like you need to downsize.
Mm-hmm.
And like not always, like we're not like, I'm not trying to over exaggerate, but there are cases I've seen when people had to do that. And that conversation, that relationship should be so strong when you get home and you didn't make that paycheck that week, right? So it shouldn't be a fight. It should be, all right, I got you. Next week, we're going to come back and keep doing it again, right?
Right. And having an understanding, yeah, just having that understanding there of what exactly you're getting into as a family. Just having that very clear. Um, because, when things aren't, it can, I try not to let it bleed over, but it's human nature, right? If things aren't smooth at home, it's just gonna weigh on your mind. Whether it's present at the front of your mind, it's still, there's a part of it there that you're thinking about it, and it's gonna affect things with your business. And eventually that can, if things get worse on one end or the other, it can affect, it can just kind of spiral. So I
100%.
would definitely agree with that. And I think
Awesome.
I think going back to the other advice, sorry, I just thought of this. I think
Yeah.
a lot of dentists, or some people, they kind of want the reward now, and that's just, as an Indian and as an immigrant, it was kind of delayed gratification always.
Yeah.
So that's another thing to keep in mind if you are doing a startup, is to be very mindful of not treating yourself, like buying that new car, or, like things like that. Like you just got to be, I mean, I've got a SUV that I've had for 5 years. I'm going to ride it for another 15. So it's like
Right.
just kind of things like that. Like you'll have that time if you do things right, you treat people the right way, the practice will grow. You'll have that time to spoil yourself. But when you're starting that practice and building it up, that's not the time to kind of get loose with some of that
Yeah.
stuff.
I always tell my team, I hope people would not listen to this, and maybe like 4 or 5 people listen to this podcast, because sometimes I'm embarrassed to say this, but I have to tell you this. Like even from the days when I was building dental practices till today, if I see the doctor owner or the practice manager who's a spouse drive a fancy car and park, like nothing wrong with driving a fancy car. I'm totally fine, especially if you had an off for 20 years and you and your spouse drive nice cars, go for it. I
Right.
have a problem when they park a fancy car in front of the door.
Yeah.
Like I can tell you, I can already walk in the office. I'm like, I can't work with this office. Like I already know the attitude.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just, I think sometimes it rubs the staff the wrong way too. Like, they may not mention it or they may not be open about it, but I've always been of the mind that you never want to present yourself as more than anybody else. Yes, they are technically your employees, and yes, they technically do work for you, but that's not how anybody wants to be treated. Like even if they are in a position where they're little bit lower on the quote unquote totem pole, you don't need to make them feel that way. Ultimately, it should be a team mindset, and that's how the office is going to be successful, because we only do so much. We're one cog in the whole machinery of a dental office. Assistants do their part, front office does their part. Um, so it's all just getting that synergy in place and working together.
That's awesome. All right. Just to wrap it up, any parting advice would you give to anybody who even opened an office a week or two ago? We have a few of those on at Zen, and I want to share this with them so that they can listen. And we have specialists, we have pediatric dentists that are opening up the practice. Some work with coaches, some don't. But is there anything that you want to share?
Um, yeah, I would say just be patient. Be patient. It, like I said earlier, nothing worth having happens overnight. So understand that if you treat people the right way, you do things the right way, you do the best dentistry that you're able to do, treat your staff right, everything else will eventually click into place. It does happen organically. As long as you're not in a market that's super saturated, you've picked your location right, which is assuming that you've done all the legwork initially correctly. Um, you, I'm of the mind, that's how I've seen it in my career. If you just treat people right, and I've screwed up plenty of times, but I've also been accountable in those situations. You don't try to hide it or sweep it under the rug. I think patients really appreciate that. So, and also treating every patient like they're the VIP. That's taking your time initially when you're not busy to get systems in place, how you treat patients, getting expectations in order, dialing all that in so when you do grow, it's the culture has been set and the expectation has been set as to what's acceptable in the office and what's not.
And doing your own hygiene.
Yeah, and do your own hygiene. Yeah, absolutely. That'll, especially with what hygienists are asking nowadays. I think it'll provide you a little bit of a buffer initially to pick up that Cavitron.
Right. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Dr. Karan, thank you so much. You and Dr. Watts are
Thanks, Tiger. Yeah.
great. Yeah, I'm so excited. I'm so grateful that we're working together. I can't wait to see what you guys are going to do in the next 5 years. I'm going to come out and see you guys for sure. I want to visit. I
Absolutely.
want to
Yeah.
meet you guys. So yeah,
Absolutely.
but super grateful.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I I'm in the boat with the other people doing the startups, but I'm happy if anybody wants to reach out, and I'm happy to get some emails as well. So because I always need advice too, and I'm always willing to receive it. So
Yep. I'll
yeah,
include that.
yeah,
Awesome.
I appreciate you having me on.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dr. Karan.
Thanks, Tiger.